Oi, oi, it's your boy, Slacky J, coming at you on Wednesday, the 4th of August. And I was going to come at you on Monday. But then I was feeling sort of dispirited because while the AJ McKee versus Patricio Pitbull fight was exciting, it was very short. Mads Bennell, obviously I could ramble about him forever, but not going to get many views. And then the UFC didn't even... I mean, the fights were good, but they didn't put any effort into their card name-wise. And I'd done, every time I do an episode where I lead with Bellator, and Bellator is the thumbnail and Bellator is the title, I do reliably half the views and listens. And, actually, no, views are typically, as in YouTube views, are typically more volatile. My podcast downloads tend to stay about the same. But, it's not generating any revenue or anything. It's just very disheartening to talk passionately about something and then realize that nobody gives a shit in the wider MMA audience. So I held off on doing that. And then on last night, Tuesday, Kevin Iole, so take it with a grain of salt, but Kevin Iole dropped the stat that the UFC's dog shit name card did 900,000 views, as in during the main event, and Bellator, I think, averaged about 80,000 all the way through, picking up to like 96,000 during the main event. Just, for all of us in the MMA sphere who are like, damn, Bellator did amazing things this weekend at the UFC. They took an L. No, it's not like that at all. Now, there's all kinds of special considerations there. Showtime is available to fewer people. It's not a part of standard cable packages in a lot of parts of the USA. ESPN is a much more common channel to have, or ESPN Plus or whatever. And then there's some people watched it on YouTube, some people watched it on BBC iPlayer. I'm telling you now, no, they didn't. No, nobody uses iPlayer to watch Bellator. iPlayer is exclusively for women watching property programs and the Great British Bake Off. But then we're getting into the realm of Vince Vaughn's character in Anchorman, where he's like, those ratings don't take into account houses that have more than 2 televisions and other things of that nature. I'm waiting for the teep to the junk excuse, but his response to this has been to sort of ignore it and call for a unification match and say that the UFC doesn't have balls for doing this unification match. Just anytime someone mentions this, and there's only going to be like one person in your life who ever brings this up, but if they say like, oh, the UFC should do a unification match, it's what the fans deserve, blah, 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 they're clearly scared of Volkanovski losing to AJ McKee or whoever is the Bellator champion flavor of the month, just say, I also have a world featherweight title, and I have challenged Alexander Volkanovski, and their silence, the UFC and Volkanovski, has been deafening. I even said we could co-promote it 40-60, me taking the 40. But that's how scared they are of me. No, obviously, you're not going to co-promote with an organisation that can't draw a tenth of your viewers on their best night. There's literally nothing to be gained. And yes, there's a degree of why would you legitimize the competition? But now it feels like the UFC needs to legitimize their competition because they're in the middle of a... antitrust, anti-monopoly lawsuit. And they've been like, no, look, MMA outside the UFC is thriving. Unfortunately, Bellator can't kick it into an open goal. And the UFC basically has to rely on being like, we can't even make a dent in the Asian market. ONE FC dominates there. And you're like, no, they don't really. The reason that you don't make a dent in the Asian market is because you barely give a shit about it. It was like, the ghost of Anderson Silva versus Kelvin Gastelum in Shanghai. Oh, Anderson Silva's out. Michael Bisping, you were only knocked down a week ago by GSP and finished. Would you like to take this last-minute main event? I can't even remember what the last UFC Japan main event was. But at any rate, let's talk about the actual fights briefly. AJ McKee came out, stayed southpaw for the entire time, didn't run in and swing at Pitbull. But we talked about this last week. I said, he does switch. I'd like him to stay southpaw, fight the lead hand. Firstly, if you're southpaw, yes, the left hook is an issue for you, but it's very much a special situation. Landing a left hook on a southpaw who's standing quite side on is very different to landing a left hook on another orthodox fighter who's coming in and trading blows with you. And that's where Pitbull starches so many people. And obviously Pitbull is so short and sawn off and stumpy that he's not going to be able to reach long right-handed swings to McKee if McKee keeps a good stance and keeps an eye on it. And that's what you saw. Pitbull didn't do anything for the early going. He landed like one good low kick, and McKee was throwing body kicks. He'd said he was going to knock him out with a body kick, which was, I suppose, a setup because he then threw a head kick, kicked him in the head, had him wobbling, grabbed the guillotine as Patricio ducked in, and finished with the choke. And it was a technical submission because Pitbull went limp, looked a bit upset about the stoppage, but yeah, he was pretty clearly done. I mean, really impressive. We were talking about, like, up to this, I was saying there aren't a whole lot of things that Patricio does to build through a fight. You know, he's not a guy who reliably does damage in all the rounds. He's really a sort of big moments fighter and has amazing patience. And AJ McKee basically took that all away from him. He's like, okay, we're going to have a nice slow-paced kickboxing match in the opening round, and he didn't even get out of the opening round. And wouldn't you know it, AJ McKee in the aftermath of the fight says he wants to fight Floyd Mayweather because Floyd Mayweather's the best in his sport and AJ McKee's the best in this sport. Unbelievably stupid. It's just the stupidest tradition in MMA. And it's so drawn out and played out now. Floyd Mayweather's like 46 years old. He's not the best boxer in the world anymore. I doubt he's the best person in his own house at maintaining an erection at this point. But it was so funny, people being like, yeah, Floyd's going to pay attention to this one. But co-main event was Mads Bennell versus Emmanuel Sanchez. Much closer than I expected, because I've never been really blown away by Emmanuel Sanchez. But this whole fight, the commentary, it was Big John and Mauro. I love Mauro, but it was also Mauro. But Big John was especially terrible this fight. It was like Emmanuel Sanchez's whole career. It was just someone constantly telling you how amazing Emmanuel Sanchez is, while you're watching him and going, is he? Just swinging 10 punch combinations at Bennell and hitting nothing but air and gloves. And Bennell didn't do himself any favours by adopting a high forearms guard and not doing his usual dipping as much. But like, you can watch the slow-mo of the fight and barely anything actually lands anywhere useful. Bennell's grappling, of course, was incredible. You know, I don't even know what his pedigree or accolades are, but he ragdolls people. His wrestling looks really good nowadays, and his top game's got better and better. But they hit the mat, and the moment that they do, Sanchez works his way up to the quad pod, and I think he hit a nice Granby, rolled through and put Bennell on the bottom momentarily, and Big John goes into this 10-minute ramble about how good Emmanuel Sanchez's ground game is and how he's a legitimate black belt in addition to being a world-class striker. And he's saying all this during a half-guard sweep. Like, you know, the classic come up on the single leg, you got it between your legs, and you push into them, try and push them over, they push back into you, you roll back over your shoulders and take them over the top. He did that. You could see the guy was getting swept for the full 10-15 seconds it was happening, because he didn't have the underhook, he didn't have a very good overhook, he was being moved around, and Big John's still just rambling about this guy's grappling and how great it is. There's nothing else on that card worth covering. You know, the Dagestanis went 3-0 on it with Khabib in the corner, so now Khabib's the best coach in MMA. Truth is, the Dagestanis were all matched up against gimmies. Usman Nurmagomedov, in like the fight before the co-main event, the co-main event, if you will, fought some guy who was 12-7, had 19 fights, lost half of them, ain't killed a motherfucker yet. But they did introduce him as undefeated ellipses in Bellator, which I liked. But yeah, fuck all else on that card I care about. On the UFC card, Cheyenne Biles knocked a girl out with an up kick. Oh, sorry, no, it wasn't an up kick. It was that situation we talk about a lot, where the person performs a technical stand-up, so they put one hand to the mat and perform the stand-up on that side. And there is a moment where, from squatted down with your hand and your feet on the floor to standing up in your guard, your hand has to come off the floor and come up to your head. And that's where you can head kick people. And Gegard Mousasi did it to Thiago Santos in his trip to the big leagues that time. Eric Anders did it to that guy that he beat the snot out of. You see it from time to time, and it's technically legal because their hands come. There is a moment where their hand comes off the floor and they're standing on both feet. It's something of a weakness in the technical stand-up generally, which is, you know, supposed to be the best way to get up without getting kicked in the head for street fights. But yeah, I mean, it exists, the issue with it. There's something interesting that Gary Tonin does when he does a little stand-up, because he does a lot of shooting from his butt, like in grappling tournaments. If you watch his match with Wagner Rocha, not the last ADCC, the one before that, I think it was. But he does a lot of, like, if guys won't engage him when he's sitting, he will put a hand to the mat and perform a technical stand-up, but only up to a knee. So he'll have a knee on the mat and be in sort of a combat-based position, and then he'll shoot from there, and he can catch guys' ankles and stuff. But he's done it in MMA too, like that sort of partitioned get-up. And if you did that, if you went to the knee first and then stood up, I mean, you'd still have got kicked in the head, but you would have got the DQ at least. But it happened, and Mark Smith's looking outside the cage to check that the kick's legal, while Bice is smashing this unconscious lass in the face. Really not great reffing. I understand that you have to check if it's legal, but just check if the fight's over first. Like if the person's been knocked out, you can check if the kick was legal or not afterwards and give them the win or not. And then the main event was Sean Strickland versus Uriah Hall. Honestly, not as bad as I expected. I don't know why I expected bad. I think I was just annoyed that they put on such a lacking in name value card. And I think that's the other thing that bums me out about, like, I make a lot of fun of Bellator because they do shitty manipulative stuff. And it doesn't help that there's people like Teep and others who are just like, yeah, this is the premium form of MMA. But when I want to see Bellator succeed when they do good things, when they put on great fights, and this was a great matchup on a good card, and people didn't give a shit. And the UFC put on, they turned out to be good fights, but there was no name value on that card, which is, I'm not being like name value, like I want to see Donald Cerrone or Matt Brown. I'm like, I want to see top fighters fighting top fighters, not people who could have been called up from LFA or just skipped the Contender Series or whatever. And the other side of this is that this 900,000 views on this week, because you remember they were saying like 800,000 views during Islam Makhachev proved he was a star. Like, no one on this card was a star or expected to be a star, except Uriah Hall about 10 years ago. But it did as good or better numbers than previous events. So it just means that people don't give a shit. Like the larger public who watch, the majority of people who make up the viewers of this sport don't care. And that's not good, because it means that bargaining for better pay for fighters who are, not even the amazing names, but the guys who are decent names, the guys who reliably headline these fight night cards and stuff like that, they have even less leverage now, or leverage as we say in the UK, because the UFC can just bring in, they can bus in guys who've never fought in the UFC before and do, either the same numbers or slightly worse, or even better, just on chance. So yeah, this is the thing, like, people are always like, oh, there needs to be a healthy opposition to the UFC, you should be rooting for Bellator. And I'm like, well, the Bellator are doing it awfully. And I do want a healthy opposition to the UFC, but clearly this is not it. Ooh, Cantwell's trading on Twitter, but I thought it was Steve Cantwell, the robot, and it isn't. So yeah, Strickland versus Uriah Hall, pretty much. I opened my last week's segment with the counterfighter who hates pressure. And Strickland did very well getting him on the back foot, applying the jab early. The first round really turned when he'd stuck a couple of jabs in Uriah's face. Uriah pumped a jab back, and he hit him with a short left hook, just leaning back. And Uriah really went into himself. And this is what you saw throughout the fight. Like, Strickland stands in front of people twitching and showing the shoulder and then pop out the jab. Whereas Uriah Hall, even back in that fight on Tough, where Chael Sonnen's just going, pump the jab, Uriah, to the one with Paulo Costa where his jab looked amazing. It's just been a case of, like, when the guy's close enough, I pump my jab. He doesn't feint a lot and then use, like, if you watch someone like Stipe or someone like that, who's very good at, like, just flicking around the jab, they'll wave their hand a little bit, they'll flick the jab in, or Bisping or GSP or someone like that. There's a lot of movement to set up these short little jabs or long, there's a lot of movement to set up a fairly weak strike, but it does good damage because the opponent doesn't block it. They don't see it coming because they've been reacting to everything else. And that's what Strickland had, and Hall was just sort of pumping his left straight whenever he saw the guy come close enough. So you saw Strickland, he'd pump the jab, or then he'd show the shoulder, and then Uriah's jab would reliably be driven out, like through his head, or where his head would be. And Strickland would throw the right hand across the top and hit him with a cross counter, or lean back and catch him with a left hook. And that would put Uriah on the back foot for like the next 30 seconds, because he just didn't want to open up. And basically the rest of this fight was the classic Uriah Hall gets paralyzed, paralysis by analysis, as they call it. Then Strickland gave a doofy-ass interview afterwards where he was like, I'd be happy to kill someone in the octagon, I'd own it, and I think it'd be cool. And you're like, shut the fuck up, Sean Strickland. Get Orlando Sanchez out here to arm crank this man again. So this weekend we've got UFC 265, a very strange pay-per-view, because the rule is title fights on all the pay-per-views, but they weren't confident Amanda Nunes could carry it on her own. So they invented a heavyweight interim title despite the fact that Francis Ngannou is not going to be out for any period of time. Just to slap on Lewis versus Gane, which is the main event. And then the Amanda Nunes fight fell through because one of them got COVID. So, yeah, that's where we are. But some fun stuff on this card, if I'm honest. We'll start with the main event. I'm going to call this episode How I Learned to Stop Hating and Love Derek Lewis. Because he does sum up everything that's shit about heavyweight MMA. He really does. Like, his gas tank is bad. When he tries to go after people on offense, he's throwing switch kicks until he gasses himself out or hurts his back. And he's got recurring back injuries. So leading with jumping switch kicks as a 300-pound man, probably not a great shout. But he does keep catching people, and it's hilarious when he does. This dude has less ways to land punches than Jeremy Stevens, who doesn't have a whole lot of ways to land punches. But he still manages it. And a lot of it is just waiting on the right time to catch the opponent with an overhand, because they will come in running eventually, especially if they think they've got you hurt even slightly. Because this is the heavyweight division. Rebounds are rare. Guys get hurt, and then they crumble. Derek Lewis does a very good job of getting hurt or even pretending to get hurt. He took a body shot from Junior Dos Santos and did the old call an ambulance, but not for me, and tried to hit him with an overhand as he came in. He got absolutely pieced up by Curtis Blades on the feet, but just waited on the single leg and then hit him with a big uppercut and knocked him out. He's an absolute beast with the elbow escape. Sorry, not the elbow escape, the arm post escape from the ground. Like, if you get side control on him, he will get his hand in the back of your tricep or armpit and shot put you over the top of him. It's like Marcelo Garcia, but without the Marcelo Garcia-ness of it. And all of that combines to make him the sort of guy that literally proves people in the bar right. You know, if someone tried to do that on me, if someone tried to take me down, I would simply hit them with an uppercut. If someone got me down, I would simply stand up again. Were I down 3 rounds, I'd simply hit him with my overhand. I'd touch him with my overhand and he'd go down. And that's Derek Lewis. That's what he does. Now, there's some interesting stats about Derek Lewis, because I think it was Aaron Brunster. He was on Twitter the other day saying Derek Lewis has a win over like half of the top 10, and has no losses to active UFC fighters or active UFC. Yeah, no losses to active UFC fighters or something like that, which is a clever way to cover up the fact that when he lost to Mark Hunt and Junior Dos Santos, those guys had one foot out the door. He was supposed to win those fights. It was quite like they did with Tai Tuivasa against Junior Dos Santos. It's like, come on, you're a knockout artist. This dude's chin is shot. He can't get away from punches. He's not as fast as he used to be. Oh, you've lost. But Junior Dos Santos, and especially Mark Hunt's performance against Derek Lewis was one of the smartest Mark Hunt ever put on. That and maybe the Roy Nelson fight, really nice fights. Because he had 2 guys who were really big hitters, and Mark Hunt's a really big hitter, but he came out and he was like, no, I'm a class apart in the hitting. And he used more feints than he'd ever used to that point. He used jabs, he used low kicks, he used nice non-committal strikes. He had Derek Lewis and Roy Nelson swinging at shadows, and both of them gassed themselves the fuck out, like trying to swing at him when he wasn't there. Highly recommend that Mark Hunt fight versus Derek Lewis, because you don't often get to see like a technical side of Mark Hunt. And he took him over, I think he took him apart over 4 rounds. Like, he stopped him in the 4th. So he really made him struggle. And then, of course, he got manhandled by DC with one arm. But, DC was a cut above most heavyweights, and he had wrestling that most heavyweights can't deal with. DC versus Ngannou is still a fascinating fight because DC is a much smarter, craftier, better wrestler or better takedown artist than Stipe Miocic. Though DC is now, very old, and I doubt he'd it's not DC of Stipe 1 going in there. But Ciryl Gane, we've talked about it several times in the past recently. The fight with Volkov was only the other day. But it's interesting because he is the kind of guy who has the tools to bring out one of those classic bad Derek Lewis performances. As in, he could make Derek Lewis work when he... one of the impressive things about the Blades fight was that Derek Lewis managed to not tire himself out while taking a beating in the first round. Whereas, against like Mark Hunt and to a degree against Dos Santos, he was made to work. They were showing him looks. They were making him counter at air. They were, landing when he wasn't trying to counter. And I think Ciryl Gane, probably the kind of guy who knows that's the way to beat Derek Lewis, that you can tire him out by making him swing at shadows. But I don't know if he's got the kind of pop to make Derek Lewis respect that. If you're giving up free punches to Mark Hunt, that's a big deal, or free punches to Junior Dos Santos. I would say that Ciryl Gane works the body a lot more than... to be fair, Junior Dos Santos does work the body a lot, but Ciryl Gane very happy to just work away at the body, and I think that's a great shout against Derek Lewis. Really puts the ticking clock on things, because Derek Lewis is going to gas out. Every heavyweight is going to gas out. If you get to the body, it's going to happen sooner, and this is a 5-round fight. Gane's been fighting southpaw a lot more recently, which, again, as we said, stretches out the rear hand. If the guy throws... Pitbull, we were talking about how he uses the left hook, likes to sideswipe people as they step in, or as they're hanging around in the pocket. Derek Lewis likes to come with the overhand as people step in or hang around in the pocket. Making a nice long-range southpaw versus orthodox fight removes some of the possibility of that happening, stretches out the right hand, makes it easier to see coming. Kicking the legs against Derek Lewis has always been a great shout, because he looks like his knees are trashed anyway, but he stands very awkwardly, doesn't look ready to check at any point. But the thing we got, there is, it isn't so much a case of him having to make a mistake here. He has mistakes inbuilt, or he has habits that rather, I always used to say this, we don't talk about mistakes, we talk about habits, because if you do something often enough, and everyone does, there is no fighter who is like one of those shape-shifting characters in fighting games where they have whatever style it is and then it changes to one of the other 20 fighters on the roster. But no one is formless, shapeless, whatever fighter. You have your favorites, and that's where you can be counted, training for your habits. And some habits are worse or easier to counter than others. And Ciryl Gane's habit of hanging around after striking, and then especially when he thinks that he can get some damage done, he will try and dig in and throw these big looping swings. He was getting caught with counters by Volkov that he just shouldn't have. It's also worth noting that Ciryl Gane has had a good size advantage over everyone he's fought except Volkov. I mean, you watch him against Tanner Boser, and even though Gane isn't the biggest hitter in the world, he's very clearly stronger. He's just hitting him with intercepting knees and pushing him away. Derek Lewis, while he's not the most technical striker in the world, or particularly fast, is a big, strong, bad dude. I'm interested to see, will he let Gane push him around, or will he come back at him, use the clinch, wear on him, make him feel the weight of one of the biggest dudes in the UFC. The other thing that I've seen in Gane lately that I'm not a huge fan of is the sort of Donald Cerrone ducking the head, or Henan Brow ducking the head shots, which, I like the idea of taking Derek Lewis down. I like the idea of sprinkling them in and giving him more to think about, but I don't like the idea of big telegraphed shots, because if Curtis Blades is getting caught coming in, you are going to get caught coming in if you're ducking your head very obviously. I'd much rather see him land good knees or something, come in to smother Lewis, and then try and trip him from the clinch. But this is a really good fight. I was going to do a Filthy Casuals guide, but I was I do not want to curse Ciryl Gane. And Yeah. It's crazy how hyped people are for the idea of Derek Lewis versus Ngannou 2. Just like, and a lot of people I see in the comments, in like the replies to tweets by the UFC, the official UFC, don't seem to know that there was a first fight. But then, whom amongst us is telling our friends who are slightly into fighting to make sure to check out Derek Lewis versus Francis Ngannou 1? So that brings us on to the rest of the card. Because, I'm not going to give you a ton of information about how, Cyril Gane's striking matches up with Derek Lewis, because a lot of Derek Lewis's striking is just timing people with overhands. But on the subject of timing people with overhands, Pedro Munhoz, his most famous performance, obviously timing Cody Garbrandt on the step with the overhand multiple times. But he's taken on Jose Aldo in the co-main event. Aldo coming off that win over Marlon Vera, where he really just looked clever. Just looked like he'd been doing this forever. Marlon Vera, has had a lot of success being sort of chaotic energy. And the moment he got in with Jose Aldo was like, slow down a bit, mate. And hit him in the body, which, as we've already said, slows people down. Not only in terms of tiredness, but it makes people less happy about stepping in. Great one is Mayweather Maidana 2. It just lands these beautiful right uppercuts to the solar plexus and just changes the complexion of the fight. But before that, Aldo's actually on a 3-fight losing streak. Volkanovski, the decision, which was close and obviously has aged very well because Volkanovski is now the best featherweight in the world, came down to bantamweight, lost to Marlon Moraes in a split decision that most people thought he won, was booked to fight Henry Cejudo in the title fight off that, which was very funny. And then he had that fight with Petr Yan. Petr Yan, beat the shit out of him, but Aldo had his moments, against the sharpest fighter in the world right now at that weight. And I think this is the thing, the Aldo is great stuff. I hear a lot of it because I'm on MMA Twitter, where Aldo is respected as much as he should be. But if you go wider Twitter or onto the UFC's tweets or anything like that, Aldo is really not regarded as he should be. Anytime you're doing GOAT discussion, and I think GOAT discussion is dumb shit, but if Aldo's not involved, you don't know much about MMA. Because the guy's title run was incredible, and yes, people got better. That's just what happens over time as he aged out. But even now, he's still competing with the absolute murderers of the division and looking sharp doing it. To put that into perspective, it's 2021, and he fought Alexander Franco Nogueira Pequena, one of the greatest featherweights. Well, at that point, the greatest featherweight of all time, one of the best featherweights in the world. He fought him in 2008 June. So he's been at this game for a long time. As Mario Esperian would say, I've been doing this shit a long time. Meanwhile, Pedro Munhoz's career doesn't start until 2009. Got to the UFC in 2014. He had an okay early run. Put on a good streak of wins with Brett Johns, Brian Caraway, Cody Garbrandt. Lost to Aljo in that fight where Aljo just threw everything in the kitchen sink at him on the feet. Lost the split decision to Frankie Edgar, which was very contentious. And then beat Jimmy Rivera recently. He's an interesting character because he came in with basically a guillotine and a low kick. And since then, he's learned to box quite well. His jab's really good, and until very recently, he was barely using it as he should be. We talked a lot about the Cody Garbrandt fight and how I thought that was a piece of masterful game planning, because rather than focusing on Cody's hands, which are incredibly fast, he just set up a bigger distance and said, come to me, and then countered the step. The moment that Cody stepped, he slipped his head and threw the overhand. And he kicked his leg, to start with too. But, since then he's adopted the calf kick much more. Seriously, if you watch his first fight, maybe not his first fight in the UFC because that's a sun sale, but watch that fight with Matt Hobar or Russell Doan or any of those early guys that he fought. He's his only strike on the feet is the low kick. It's really strange, as in the thigh low kick. So he's standing quite close to them too. And it still makes up a large part of his game. So I'm quite interested in this one because there's one thing Jose Aldo hasn't had much of a problem with. It's low kicks. I do say a lot of the time, kick with the kicker. Just because that guy has good low kicks doesn't mean that you can't low kick him successfully. Or because you've got shit low kicks doesn't mean that the low kick can't be an important part of your game. Because if you get the guy to pick his leg up, he's not moving. There have been some times where Jose Aldo's been low kicked successfully. He was focusing so much on pivoting offline against Frankie Edgar. Whenever Frankie Edgar could threw the low kick out, he'd catch him in the back of the hamstring as he was pivoting. And that's a really good connection. You're right, Hall hit a couple of those against Strickland last night, or Saturday night, or whatever it was. But typically, Jose Aldo had been very good at checking low kicks. Moicano came out and tried to calf kick him. He just pulled his heel back towards him, pointed his knee out, made sure he caught him on the shin, didn't pick his leg up too much, which is, as we're always saying, like if you watch Gilbert Melendez versus Jeremy Stevens or anything like that, guys who pick their leg up to check, it just clacks through at the ankle if you're throwing a calf kick. So the trick is to present them the front of the shin, but try and keep your leg low while you do it. So some guys do that by stepping in. Aldo did it by just retracting it very slightly and pointing his knee at the opponent. He's also very good at getting one back off the low kick, so that'll be interesting too. How much can Pedro Munhoz actually use his low kick? How much can Pedro Munhoz use his jab? Because the jab has been a weakness in Jose Aldo. It used to be that he didn't have a jab. I was writing back in 2013 or whatever. Man, Jose Aldo, if he had a jab, he'd be a really complete fighter. And then he comes out against Frankie Edgar, has a beautiful jab, never looked back. But the Max Holloway one is a great example. Volkanovski to a lesser extent, but Max Holloway, through 2 fights, showed Jose Aldo lots of jabs, was very convincing in hiding his jab, or rather he never really showed when he was going to commit to his jab, so he showed lots of feints and he threw lots of flicky jabs. And Jose Aldo, his response to people punching at him is to slip and rip as hard as possible and try and take their head off. And he very quickly tired himself out, and Holloway could just stay on top of him and start to accumulate some damage as the rounds went on. Do I think Pedro Munhoz has that in him? I don't know, because I've never seen Pedro Munhoz really build off his jab either. It's a really great single shot weapon. I haven't seen an awful lot of feinting success from him, but he uses the jab really well, like just throws it out from the shoulder. But he doesn't tend to build on it that much. So really interesting fight. Anytime you get to see Jose Aldo fight, it's a pleasure, because you're going to see high-level technique. And Pedro Munhoz, in his own right, is getting much better. And that's not even considering the ground game, which Jose Aldo is fucking magic in the ground game and basically refuses to engage in it except on a whim. So, Ricardo Lamas spent 5 rounds trying to get Aldo off his feet, and Aldo refused. And then Aldo threw him to the mat, got into his butterfly guard, stood slightly and slapped his knees down. So he just mounted him from the butterfly guard. And he was like, oh, could you have done that this whole time? I mean, probably not, but it was really impressive, just the nonchalance, the sprezzatura of it. 2 languages there. We're a multilingual show. And Pedro Munhoz's ground game is all about the guillotine, of course. You see him get on guys' backs, and then they'll stand up next to the fence, and he'll swing round them onto the guillotine. Arm in, arm out. He's great at all of them. Yeah. This is an interesting one. Vicente Luque versus Michael Chiesa, because that is about as extreme a style contrast as you could ask for. Every promo package in this sort of fight starts with striker versus grappler. This is back to the days of UFC 1, but it really is. I mean, Vicente Luque is Mr. Counterpuncher, and Michael Chiesa is the overwhelming grapple wrestler. Stick to you, make it so that you can't punch, take away the explosivity, mold them with strength and technique. Chiesa's a bit weird though, because he has fought recently, but I've got in my head he barely ever fights. He fought Dos Anjos, which was a bit of a gimme because it's welterweight and it's Dos Anjos versus a wrestler. And then he fought Neil Magny in January of this year. Okay, so that was a year apart. And he had he had Carlos Condit, Diego Sanchez, Rafael Dos Anjos. Someone likes Michael Chiesa. I mean, he got a commentary gig, but someone likes Michael Chiesa because those are 2 of those are old dudes. One of them can't wrestle, Carlos Condit. Diego Sanchez is very, very old. And Rafael Dos Anjos hates wrestlers. So they really did do their best to get him good looks there. But then he took on Neil Magny, who was in a good spot, and he won that one. And this is by no means a gimme, because Vicente Luque is a scary, scary man. Vicente Luque is the fighter that everyone should like. It's crazy because he was on an 8-1 streak at one point. Okay, no, he ran his streak up to 10-1 with 2 decisions. One was the loss and one was the win. So 10-1 with 9 finishes, and people still didn't seem to care. It's fucking crazy. Lost the fight to Stephen Thompson. Did decently in the first round, and did decently trying to snatch his way back into the fight. We talk about it a lot, but like he's so good at patiently waiting on the counter, like Patricio Pitbull, but better than Patricio Pitbull, who is sort of like waiting for the perfect shot. Vicente Luque covers up, throws the left hook. If you're close enough, he's going to knock you out. Or at least chin check you. And he did several times against Thompson. Thompson had to really rein himself in, because any time that like Vicente Luque backed himself onto the fence and was like, oh no, you've got me, Stephen Thompson would come in and he'd try and take his head off. But he was rebounded nicely. Nico Price stopped him. Randy Brown stopped him. Tyron Woodley danced him. So yeah, another 3 finishes in a row. How's his wrestling? I mean, he stopped Woodley taking him down, but Woodley was already dinged, and Woodley is, he has aged about as badly as Johnny Hendricks at this point. Other good takedown artists that tried to take him down. He had a good little grappling match with Leon Edwards. Oh, Bilal Muhammad he fought, who's also pretty good at taking people down, but he knocked him out in like 119, and that was about the best left hook in MMA you'll see, except maybe Charles Oliveira, Michael Chandler. But yeah, I mean, Chiesa, it's pretty obvious what his game plan is going to be. Stick to him. I'd be very interested to see him, shoot low, come in on the low singles and things like, Satoshi's done it. Khabib used to do it. Just the other day, Matthias, the gamer word, Gamrot, he did it. He did it in his fight with Jeremy Stevens. Enter low, climb up, which is kind of the reverse of how Jose Aldo deals with takedowns. The people enter high, he spreads his base as wide as possible and goes bladed, and he pushes them down the leg so that they're on the bottom of the leg, and then he could slip his foot free. But then Chiesa is so strong, maybe he just gets an upper body clinch and is able to push him to the fence and trip him. But the other thing about entering on like mid-level shots, I'm calling them mid-level shots. I called them like low, level changes before, but now guys are using the low single. But entering like for double legs and single legs and things, is that Vicente Luque has a monstrous DAS. He's got 3 finishes with it in the UFC. He almost caught it on Leon Edwards a couple of times. That might be tied for most. I think it's either Dustin's got a couple, Tony's got a couple. But yeah, I mean, that's a specialist in the DAS. So diving for his hips or, thighs, probably not a great idea, because he's going to, come out of it and front headlock you or sprawl on you and front headlock you. But we'll see. Very intrigued by that. Chiesa's striking kind of spazzy, but he did have his moments against Jorge Masvidal, of all people, because Jorge Masvidal does not like the southpaws. And actually, that's quite interesting in this one because, as we said, the left hook, different against southpaws. And the cross counter, not there against southpaws. I'm trying to think of the last southpaw that I saw Luque face. I mean, Stephen Thompson goes to southpaw. I think Jalen Turner was a southpaw because that was an awkward fight for him. And Leon Edwards obviously fights southpaw and beat him by showing lots of feints and point fighting and doing the things that people hate about Leon Edwards but that make him an amazing fighter. What else is good? Tecia Torres versus Angela Hill, my girl Angie Hill. I feel like they've fought about 4 times now, but yeah, cool. Song Yadong versus Casey Kenny, that's actually good. Side note, Marlon Vera was saying like he was trying to get a fight with Dominic Cruz and Dominic Cruz didn't want it. And I saw people saying like, well, he hasn't earned a shot at Dominic Cruz. And you're like, well, no, he has. He's beaten current guys like Sean O'Malley. Dominic Cruz is coming back off a win off unranked Casey Kenny, who they gave him because he was like TJ Dillashaw but not as good. Give Marlon Vera the Dominic Cruz fight or retire Dominic Cruz. Song Yadong versus Casey Kenny, yeah, like it. It's interesting because Yadong, very, very fast, good hitter, but definitely uses the takedowns, not just when he needs to, but mixes them in and has more effect because of it. Casey Kenny, very strong wrestler, likes switch hitting, shows lots of feints, and sets things up with like little knee raises to mini Superman punches and things like that. So yeah, that'll be good. Fiziev versus Bobby Green. I mean, that seems like a gimme. Seems like they're trying to get some eyes on Fiziev. But Bobby Green, he's been pretty good through the quarantine. He's been the man of the quarantine, as I keep saying. I feel like this is a horrible fight for Bobby Green because Bobby Green tends to not do enough. He's very good at like shoulder rolling off punches and things. It's not as bad as it used to be where he'd literally just shoulder roll punches, brush his shoulders theatrically, and then not do anything. But he definitely doesn't drive as high a pace as he needs to. And, if you're the boxer / double legger, and he does short level changes like Mads Bennell. He boxes his way in and then he uses his head movement to set up the level change and take people down. But if that's your game and you wait around too much on the outside, putting you in with a guy who's going to pelt you with kicks like Fiziev seems a bit of a, that's probably not going to end well. But if he sticks to Fiziev, if he gets him on the back foot, if he pressure fights him, which I haven't seen Bobby Green do, but if he's able to pressure fight him, put together some combinations, and drop on his hips near the fence, you can, Fiziev very strong in the clinch, very strong at fighting the upper body and takedown attempts. But if you can put him on the fence, you can take away the kicks and you can set up those grinding takedowns and back takes. Also, if you get into the fence, you can punch his fucking body, which is a great idea against someone who is throwing their legs up at your head, because it'll make it a bit harder by tiring them out. That's the theme of the podcast, hit the fucking body. So anything else on that card worth mentioning? Manel Kape is basically about to be shown the door, because he lost a close decision against Pantoja, lost a split decision against Nicolau, and now he's fighting Ode Osborne. There haven't been bad fights, but they've not been... he's not been anything close to what people were hoping he'd be coming in. He's just not done enough. He's been he's Bobby Green if Bobby Green could hit, and then still taking the same breaks and being like, I feel like I should have won that. Anderson Dos Santos, the son of Anderson Silva and Junior Dos Santos, is on the card against Miles Johns. Karolina Kowalkiewicz is back against Jessica Penne. Jessica Penne just got off a long layoff herself. Karolina Kowalkiewicz, actually, she had some... She was in some articles the other day because she's been having issues with suicidal thoughts, or had been. I don't think she'd fought in a while. Oh no, she fought Yan Jianan in February of last year. She's on a 4-fight losing streak, going back to the knockout against Jessica Andrade. Yeah, that's awkward. But she is fighting someone who's got a lot of ring rust and is a bit of a relic of the past herself in Jessica Penne. But I liked how Penne looked in her last one, so I'm not going to judge too much. Actually, in Penne's last fight, she was doing something really interesting. This just shows how much of a throwback she is. She used to do things like in Invicta. She was on the bottom of side control underneath some lass. She pushed her top hand off, the hand that's cross-facing or controlling the head, and Penne throws her own legs over her head, like Marilyn Manson style, and catches a crucifix, rolls through on a crucifix from the bottom of side control. And Liam McGeary used to try and do that too. But in this last one, her UFC return, she kept getting put to the fence, and she'd take the overhook and wrist control and start trying to jump the triangle. She'd throw her overhooking arm side leg round the back of her opponent and catching her hip and keep threatening to jump the triangle. I think it was Giofredo Pepe pulled one off once. But Shinya Aoki does that a lot. If you watch his fights with Kikuchi, which I think I shout out fairly regularly, one of them, he gets the overhook and the wrist control. He pushes the wrist so that Kikuchi's elbow slides alongside of his body and just goes behind his body enough that Aoki can throw his leg around and hook in the crook of the elbow. And Aoki spends a whole round hanging off him, threatening triangles and omoplatas. It's fantastic. You'll never see another fight like it. And then recently, was it his most recent fight? Shinya Aoki at the age of 50-something, smoking 20 a day, smoking 60 a day. He clinches up with Edward Foliang. Foliang knows that obviously Shinya Aoki wants to take him down, so he turns himself onto the fence, threatens to jump the triangle, does a little jump, and then drops down to trip him. Absolutely gorgeous. Ed Herman versus Alonzo Minifield. Middleweights are going to throw punches at each other. And that's about your lot. So I'm going to get out of here for today. I'm going to be back on Monday, hopefully. I'm going to be travelling, so it could be a sketchy travelling setup with worse microphone, but I will be back on Monday. I'm finishing Advanced Striking 2.0 Igor Vovchanchin for this week, so that should hopefully be out by Friday. And if you didn't see it, I did a piece on Lydia Sobieska and the Japanification of karate, which a lot of people replied to with, what about the Brazilianism of Brazilian Jiu-Jitsu and stuff like that, and clearly didn't realise that Okinawa was independent of Japan for most of the development of the original karate. But I'm not going to judge. Anyway, yeah, if you like video game shit, that one's about Tekken and stuff, and also about karate and expectation versus reality in fighting. It's got some stuff from my favourite book of all time, the most expensive book I own, which has a fascinating story in itself. I own 2 copies of it, and one, someone has gone through and painted black paint over the face of one of the guys demonstrating techniques in every single picture he appears. So I had to get another copy to check who it was. But it's literally paint. Someone has gone through their own copy and painted over this guy's face. And I just pick up old Masayama books whenever I see them. But yeah, this book was written in 1970 when Masayama was supposed to be like godlike, done the 100-man kumite and stuff like that. But they hadn't actually hosted any knockdown tournaments. So 1970, he still thinks that cat stance and waving his hands is how real fighting is. And then they did their first tournament in 1974 with actual full contact fighting. And it would look nothing like that. Masayama's a fascinating one. Go read John Blooming's interview about Masayama, because Masayama, a lot of it was showmanship. But still, guys like Andy Hug, Semi Schilt, inspired by him, worshipped him, Francisco Filho, Glaub Feitosa. Very important figure. Anyway, Tekken, Masayama, Lydia Sobieska, stuff like that. That's in that article. And if you want to send an email to the podcast, jackslackpodcast@gmail.com. And if you want to see what I'm writing at any time, fightprimer.com. I am your boy, Jack Slack. 25 minutes of Cyril Gane, cautiously kickboxing. Bless.